Hello and welcome along to our chat this evening about free trade versus fair trade. How free is fair trade and how fair is free trade? First of all, before we talk about any of those things, we need to talk about government controls, how governments actually control the trade, import and export that comes in and out of their country. So essentially there's a couple of different methods that the government uses. The first one being subsidies, second is tariffs, and the third one is trade quotas. Now, in your previous studies, you've heard how these different types of trade work, imports, exports, the advantages, disadvantages of trading internationally, and you've heard in the last lesson how the EU works, that there are no actual government restrictions on trades within the EU, so it's therefore called a free trade zone. Now, the next slide has an awesome video on it, which unfortunately due to technical difficulties you're going to have to click on the link below to actually watch on my YouTube channel. Subsidies cost the local government money to implement, and therefore it's the local taxpayers within that area that have to pay essentially the money to use subsidies. So if you would pause this video and take a moment to click the video link there, that'll bring that up. It's about 2.5 minutes long, so not very long at all. I'm going to pause for a moment while you do that. You can pause this video though. Right, assuming you've watched the other video, this one's about tariffs. Tariffs are a tax put on imports in order to make those countries, or those goods coming into those countries, more expensive. Now the government earns revenue in this way, so unlike subsidies, it doesn't cost the taxpayers any money, it actually generates more money. But similar problems and similar upsides and downsides to subsidies exist. So please, if you would, take a moment to watch this 2-minute video with the link down below rather than the video. The video over here, due to technical difficulties, will play, but it just won't have any sound. So for the full sound, the full experience, please watch this video down below. Thank you. The last of the three is trade quotas. So a quota is another type of trade restriction that sets an actual physical limit on the quantity of a good that can be imported or exported into a country in a given period of time. So using the previous two examples, imagine once again the country A and country B, or country C, because country B is the one we go on holidays to. Country C is trying to export phones to country A. Country A says, no, you're only allowed to import, or you're only allowed to export to us 500 of those phones in a year. So they've imported an actual limit on the quantity of the amount of them that can be imported within a given period of time. It has different effects. All three of them, as you can see, will have a different effect than each other. So sometimes all three can be used, sometimes countries don't use any of them. What is free trade? Free trade is the economic policy of not discriminating against imports from and exports to other countries. Buyers and sellers from separate economies may voluntarily trade without the home government applying tariffs, quotas, subsidies, or prohibitions on their goods and services. In a free trade regime, both economies can experience faster growth rates because the economy performs very well. This is no different than voluntary trade between neighbours, towns and counties. So essentially it's similar to a company in Dublin trading with a company in Cork. The government doesn't actually interfere in their trade whatsoever. Free trade enables domestic workers to concentrate those goods and services that they have a distinct comparative advantage in. Comparative advantage essentially means that they have an opportunity to produce a particular good cheaper than their neighbours. More than likely because they're better at producing it than their neighbours, more than likely because they're more skilled at it, or more than likely because the necessary natural resources to produce it better than their neighbours. So, alternatively, what is fair trade? Fair trade is a simple yet incredibly important idea. It's all about giving the people who produce the things you buy a fair price for their work. This may seem obvious, but lots of people in poorer countries have to sell their goods at prices so low that they can't make a decent living. Often only a tiny bit of the money you pay for something goes to the person who actually made it. This happens a lot when we import things from poorer countries. So essentially a lot of people, for example cocoa growers in poorer countries, actually grow the cocoa that the chocolate bar is completely made out of, but the €1.50 that you pay for your chocolate bar, they might get cents, a tiny amount of the actual value of that chocolate bar. The Fair Trade Foundation makes sure that all of their products come from farms and factories with fair working conditions for the workers within them. This means that the workers are treated well and their children are hopefully sent to school so they can get an education, just like you. So, free trade versus fair trade roundup. On the right hand side there, you'll actually see that there's a small chart. It gives the main comparisons between the two, free trade, fair trade, the main goal of both, what they both focus on, their major actions that the countries use, creates change through, so in other words, does it create any kind of social change, economic change? What are the primary benefits of it? The supply chain. Supply chain is how it gets from the ground, if you're using cocoa beans, how it gets from the ground to you. So it goes from the ground to a factory, produces chocolate, gets wrapped in chocolate wrappings, gets put onto a truck, gets driven on an airplane or wherever it's going to, goes to the shop, you pick it up and bring it home. And what it's guided by. So take a moment to have a quick read through that. You can pause the video or rewind back anytime you like to just go over it again. I'm going to move on though. So, the next bunch of slides, that's why I have stay calm and don't panic. The next few slides are very word heavy and will contain lots of words and ideas that you may not have heard before and may not understand, but don't worry about it. The worksheet that I have given you includes a section specifically designed for you to write in those words and concepts that you're not familiar with or not comfortable with, and that you may want more clarification. And what we can do is we can go through them tomorrow, and I can pop the important ones on the keyword wall as well. So, don't worry about it, and let's get through the next bunch of slides. So, free trade versus fair trade. Economists and politicians alike debate the relative merits of free trade and fair trade. Although both concepts refer to a comprehensive means all over, or a complete approach to trading, people who favour one approach over the other are often guided by ideas that affect the political regulation of trade activity, that it be government interference. Free trade and fair trade address the same subject from very different angles, so they both want the same thing. They both want goods to be able to be sold and bought across countries, but in different fashions. Free trade, a more detailed version. Champions of free trade emphasise the reduction in barriers between countries and the elimination of preferential policies, that will be governments subsidising one, that favour the countries or specific industries. Free traders believe that a business should succeed or fail based on its ability to respond to the free and open market. So if the price drops too low for them and they can't produce it that low, then they should go out of business, without needing special government protections to protect the industry or its workers, similar to country A. Many free trade advocates advocate for the elimination of tariffs and subsidies and oppose regulations that force companies to pay extra for doing business in foreign markets. So essentially, if you have ever been to the shops, you can see that the free trade goods are generally slightly more expensive than the fair trade ones. So the ones imported from the EU, a certain price. The ones imported from further afield with a fair trade mark will always be that little bit more expensive, because you're paying that little bit extra money to make sure that the money goes to those who actually grew and dealt with it in the very first place. Fair trade. Fair trade advocates, advocate is somebody who speaks on behalf of, focus on the wages and working conditions of labour in developing markets. For example, a fair trade activist will fight to increase the wage rates of workers and improve their working conditions, especially when large multinational corporation chooses to pay pennies per hour for labour in one country instead of dozens of dollars or euros per hour elsewhere. For example, here in Ireland it's €8.65 is the minimum wage per hour, whereas in third world countries or poorer countries, multinational corporations can pay actual pennies or cents for the workers' rates per hour. Fair traders suggest that companies and governments should regulate trade to ensure that workers receive a just level of compensation and a safe working environment. Fair trade, as a term, is sometimes used to refer specifically to policies that provide a living wage to farmers for their crops, usually above market prices. Again, there's that little bit of a premium, because local and smallhold farmers cannot compete on price with large-scale factory farms. Now, the trade policy of governments. Almost no government takes a purely free trade or fair trade approach to its commercial policy. Instead, countries blend policies in various ways. So they might have some free trade, some fair trade. Ireland has free trade within the EU. It does actually impose tariffs, for example, on Argentinian beef coming in, because otherwise the Irish beef industry wouldn't be able to compete with it. So, in another example, the United States, Mexico and Canada are members of the North American Free Trade Agreement, which slashed protectionist barriers. Those would be protectionist tariffs, etc., among the three countries. However, the US also supports certain free trade policies. For example, the US Trade Representative works with the United Nations to provide preferential access to business resources to women and to minorities in markets around the world. This is the ideology. So this is the ideas that different people have, free trade and fair trade, the ideas that they want or think is right. Free trade advocates are usually conservative or libertarian. I'll explain both of those phrases tomorrow. Their support for smaller government and less regulation in general leads them to be sceptical of government programs to redistribute wealth or income. They generally don't trust their governments to try and make wealthy people slightly less wealthy and everyone else slightly less poor. Fair trade advocates, by contrast, tend towards a communitarian outlook that favours equality of income or quality of outcome, and they are more willing to embrace government action to improve people's quality of life. These differences in political outlook often make trade policy a matter of considerable debate within national governments and can lead to certain parties taking one view and an entire other party taking a different view. The economic theory. In general, economists recognise that free trade provides the least amount of overhead during the production of goods and services. So in other words, it's cheaper to produce stuff when you can bring in the raw ingredients cheaper and therefore make the overall product cheaper. So a free trade economist will emphasise the lower end price for consumers that results from trade policies that do not have government mandated price minimums. So a free trader will say, well, you can make these items cheaper and overall the consumer benefits, which would be you and me, because the items are actually cheaper. However, some economists believe that fair trade prices, which would be the one with the slightly extra price on it, help to add more consumers to an economy, and that the additional price for fair labour is outweighed by the net economic benefit that comes from adding more consumers with disposable wages into the marketplace. So if you imagine in the countries, some of the poorer countries where these people are paid a fairer wage, it means that they have more money then to go to their shops to spend more money on their products and making the shopkeepers have more money, and this goes round and around their own economy, making their own economy stronger and better. Thank you very much for listening, and I'll talk to you all tomorrow morning. Don't forget to fill out the actual worksheet, and I'll see you all tomorrow.